Hall of Fame inductee and legendary Sharks voice, Dan Rusanowsky, joins the show to talk about his induction into the Hall of Fame, Patrick Marleau's retirement ceremony, and he gives out some of his favorite arenas to call a game. So all that and more on today's episode of Locked On Sharks.
You're Locked On Sharks, your daily podcast on the San Jose Sharks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, welcome to Locked On Sharks, the premier hockey podcast covering your favorite team in the Bay Area. My name is JD Young, contributor at San Jose Hockey Now and Inside the Rink. And I want to thank you for making Locked On Sharks your first listen. Proudly a part of the Locked On Network, where we cover your team every day, or at least during the offseason right now, 3 times a week. But Dan Rusanowsky, the legendary radio voice of the San Jose Sharks, joins to talk about him going to the Hall of Fame. We talk about Patrick Marleau. He helps me with my Russian pronunciations. Talks about some of his favorite. Great chat with Dan Rusanowsky. So before we get into it with Dan, do need to let you guys know that today's episode is brought to you guys by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. And now I bring in the soon-to-be Hall of Famer, the voice of the Sharks everybody knows, Dan Rusanowsky. Dan, how are you doing this afternoon?
Fantastic, JD. You know, it's a beautiful summer day in the Bay Area, and I'm just working on a few projects and getting ready for an exciting time for the Sharks this season. But all in all, just a great day.
So I have to ask, of course, starting with, if you're going to be introduced into the Hockey Hall of Fame, has it even started to sink in yet for you?
Well, really, it hasn't. It's only going to become a reality in November when we go to the luncheon and Mark Mulvoy is honored with the Elmer Ferguson Award for Outstanding Contribution to Media, and I receive the very esteemed Foster Hewitt Memorial Award for broadcasting. To me, that is just a culmination of a lot of years, but it's the highest honor I could ever possibly achieve. It's really an amazing thing, and no, I really can't believe it.
I mean, could you ever, you mentioned like that there's no way that you ever kind of thought of this. Is it kind of this nice little like, hey, what I've done actually matters? And, you know, like we were talking beforehand, I mean, every Sharks fan knows your voice. A lot of sports fan knows your voice. Is it just this nice kind of little bow on everything for you?
Well, it sure is, but it's a real honor, and it's also something to live up to. You have to remember that. Obviously, I hold a very high standard to the work that I do, and I know that all of us do in the National Hockey League and with the San Jose Sharks. So this is really a tremendous honor for me and for my family, but also for the Sharks organization, really. And I think that it's very special, and again, as I said, something to live up to.
All right. A few years ago, I had former Monarchs coach Mark Morris on, and he claims to have started your career by walking you over to the New Haven Coliseum to introduce you to Roy Mullicar. Is this true? Does he get all the credit?
Oh, he gets a lot of credit. Mark was an assistant coach at St. Lawrence when I was there. He later became the head coach of that team and coached Clarkson and coached in the American Hockey League. And in fact, I think he's the only coach in history to have 400 wins in U.S. college and in the American Hockey League, which is really a nice accomplishment. Well, anyway, he had played for the Nighthawks, and of course, that was the team that I grew up following in the AHL, just about 10 miles from where I grew up in Connecticut. And Roy Mullicar was the president at the time, and he was the person who was hiring the announcers. And he told me that there might be an opportunity at some point and wanted to meet me. And so we went to visit with him. Mark made the introductions, and that's kind of where it all started. You know, when I did get to the American Hockey League, there were a couple of opportunities that particular year, and I had a couple of places that I could have gone. But the very first offer that I received was from my hometown area. And given what the AHL broadcasters generally make, I think it was a little bit easier to live closer to home. So I think that really was a special time in my life. And of course, Mark is a huge part of that. Great guy. And he's been an outstanding coach over the course of his career.
So, all right. How much has, I mean, you've been with the Sharks since day one, right? And you've been broadcasting a while. How much has your job changed, especially now with kind of how much more media is available, whether it's digital or whatever? How much has your job kind of changed during that time?
Well, it's really interesting because now the Sharks audio network is on 24 hours a day. So we have a lot of content that we have to put together. I put together a lot of classic games, and we have a lot of features on players and so forth. A little bit softer in the summer in terms of newer content, but we do have some. And this is the time that I'm using at this point to set up interviews with some of our alumni and get some material together for the season. So there's a lot more of it going on every single day with podcasting and with everything else that goes with it. The fact that we're streaming 24 hours a day and we still do have a terrestrial radio network, it's just more all encompassing. And, I'd say it's sort of similar in one sense to the way that that television and radio changed way back in the 60s and 70s. When I was growing up, there were only a handful of television stations you could watch, and all cars had radios, but they were mostly all AM radio. And then FM radio came in, and then cable TV came in. And so those days where you could get 35 or 40% of an audience share, it kind of ended. And what happens now is that it's much more dispersed, but also much more discriminating. And so we have an audience that's very, very targeted to San Jose Sharks hockey and to the National Hockey League. And that's great. And we also get to the new people coming to us from a variety of different ways. So that part of it's changed, but the essential meat and potatoes of it hasn't.
All right. I wanted to kind of shift gears here with something that I think was one of the highlights of this season, and that was Patrick Marleau's retirement ceremony. Of course, you and Randy Hahn were kind of emceed it. Kind of go through the emotions of that night. I mean, having the first Shark number, retired, I don't think we could argue that anybody other than Patrick Marleau was deserving of that. But go through the kind of the emotions of that day and that night.
Well, it was really an incredible weekend, really. It came all the way back to the Legends game the day before over at Tech CU Arena. I think that people were going to that not knowing what to expect. And of course, Tech CU was a very, very new place then, and nobody had been there that was in that building, I think, that night. And so the fact is that unless you were a Barracuda season ticket holder or regular attender, you probably hadn't seen the facility, didn't know what that was going to be like. And everybody came out of that with a very special feeling of just seeing everybody that we had known for so many years. How many different alumni chose to make their way to San Jose to make sure that they were here for this particular event. And of course, Patrick Marleau, the guy who's played more games than anybody else in the history of the National Hockey League, one of the best people that's ever worn the uniform. Forget about the great player that he was, and somebody that's now part of the Sharks development staff. So that's really great and a nice tie up of where he should be. But the actual night itself was just so emotional because it takes a lot, and it should take a lot to retire a player's number. And I think the Sharks have been very careful of that. And I'm very happy that they have been, because a lot of places you'll see they either retire too many numbers or their standards aren't high enough. And when you play for a team for 20 years and you play more games than anybody else in the history of the league and you score 500 goals in a Sharks uniform, I think those are some of the things that qualify, not the least of which is playing in the Stanley Cup final for the team and the only opportunity they've had thus far to play for the Stanley Cup. And no, he never won the Art Ross Trophy or the Maurice Rocket Richard Trophy, but what an amazing career. And again, 500 plus goals, game-winning goals against all but one team that he played, which is really incredible. He even had a game-winning goal against the Sharks, believe it or not, when he played for Toronto. So the only team that was missing was Vegas. And of course, Seattle doesn't count because they weren't in the league when he was playing. But that to me, and to a lot of players, is a very incredible number that certainly needs to be celebrated. And there's so many different things statistically you can talk about. But I get back to the humble young man from Aneroid, Saskatchewan, who came here as a 17-year-old out of junior hockey and a very bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and stepped right into the NHL and had his moments and his ups and his downs early as he adjusted, as all players do. But somebody that had star written all over him and had a career like that. So to see him have Kelly Rudy up there with Joe Thornton and actually be on the ice with them was an honor. I know Randy Hahn will say the same thing. but also to see the sheer emotion on Joe's face, on Kelly Rudy's face, and on Patrick's too, when he gave such a beautifully articulated speech that I think surprised some people because he's such a quiet guy.
Yeah.
Nobody thought that he might be so filled with exposition in his delivery, but it was really a beautiful night all around, and of course a prelude of some things to come as future numbers may get retired over the course of the next few years, and I think we can think of a couple.
All right, guys, before we continue with Dan Rusanowsky, he gives me some tips on how to better my Russian pronunciations. Do need to take a quick break, talk to you guys about our friends over at FanDuel. And if you want to bet on MLB, there's no better place than FanDuel, because right now you can take your first swing on bet on MLB and get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets. It's up to $200. That's right. Just bet $20. You get $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. It's $200 you can spend on betting everything from the money line, over under, who you think is going to hit the first home run of the game. I think just betting on Ohtani to keep crushing home runs feels like a fun and safe thing to do, because Ohtani's going to just keep crushing home runs right now. So you can do this all on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. There's no better place to bet on MLB than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So sign up today. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get up to $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball. Yeah, I mean, the guy who, as soon as he actually retires, because he hasn't officially retired, is one, Joe Thornton. The image that's going to stick out with me is actually just Joe Thornton just full on tears coming down his face, and it just shows how special of a relationship these two guys had, and yes, there's a lot of media and a lot of people, of course they never accomplished the big thing of winning the cup and bringing the cup to San Jose. But I mean, Joe Thornton changed the franchise. Him and Patrick Marleau changed the franchise of what we expected from the Sharks, and of being they were a cup contender for 15 straight years, and just some bad luck or this or that, and they just never able to pull it together. But
and I'd agree with that. And the funny thing is it all started when Patrick Marleau got drafted. It was that particular year. I think that the fortunes of the hockey team started to change, and that's not a coincidence. The fact that they were able to get a player like that, you bring that and fast forward to the present, and you see the kids that they drafted in the first round over the course of the last few months, Will Smith and Quentin Musty in the first round, and a few other players in subsequent rounds. That's the sort of building block that the Sharks are hoping to get in the next 20-year stretch of being a cup contender, which we all hope.
Yeah, and you partner those with William Eklund, and let's ride, baby. That's the hope, at least. So, for years, right, the lineup has been pretty stable for between your Marleaus and your Thorntons and stuff. And now, of course, the Sharks there's a lot of players entering the lineup, and between your Eklunds, you're going to have all these other. What excitement does it bring to you to have kind of coming to the ice and seeing new guys playing all the time? Especially, I think the Sharks played like 45 different guys last season. There's got to be a little excitement with that, right?
Well, there is. I don't think that that's ideal to have that many players go through the roster during a season, but it does happen on occasion. And I think that there's a certain element of excitement to that, and intensity, and maybe even some mystery. Mm-hmm. But it's going to be a long process that is going to take a couple of years. And they may even get back to the playoffs sooner than people think, which I think is probably going to be the case. However, it's still going to take a little while before everything is put together. And that's the experience we had 20 years ago.
Yep.
When the Sharks were a team that was at the bottom of the standings. They were trying to find their way. They had that little bit of success with that team that had more veterans from other clubs that people didn't want, and that special time of beating Detroit and then beating Calgary and taking Toronto to Game 7 and all of that. That was sort of the building block of what became important later. And I think that we're seeing that again with recent years. And, it's been 4 years since the Sharks have qualified for the Stanley Cup playoffs, but it's really year one of the development program. The previous 3 years were attempting to kind of hold it all together and go in for one last kick at the can before they actually did go through the rebuilding process. But with the ascension of Mike Greer to the general manager's position, I think that we're in full mode to get younger, to get faster, to have another great core group of players. And then to respect the current core group of players that's here, Logan Couture, great captain, Tomas Hertl, an outstanding hockey player that's going to be here for a number of years. And even a wily veteran like Marc-Edouard Vlasic, who's got a few years left on his contract, but somebody that's been a part of the Sharks past, now is also going to be a part of the Sharks' future and mentoring some of these great young players that come in. And who knows, before those guys hang it up as players, there might be one last kick at the can for them too. And I think that's something that everybody hopes for.
Yeah, I mean, Mike has been very adamant. We're not going to burn this down like some other franchises. And I think that's a smart thing to do, right? It's having someone who's been there and done that these kids can learn from, and I think you see a lot of mistakes of, okay, all these kids are coming up great, but like, have they learned how to, win and how to play the game, be a professional and all that stuff? And I think it's having guys like Hertl and Couture and Vlasic, like you said, who've been there and done it all, or your guys like your Smiths, your Eklunds, your Musties to learn from. I think that's a great way to approach this.
But also you have to have people like John McCarthy with the San Jose Barracuda, and you have to have a setup there. They were so close to making the playoffs last year, tied for the last playoff spot in points, but they lost the tiebreaker. And I think that's the next step, at least at the AHL level, to start to consistently make the Calder Cup playoffs, because one of the things that the young players need to learn is how to deal with a best of 7 series against men, which is what you're dealing with in the American Hockey League. So I think that that's going to be helpful too, and that'll accelerate the development at the NHL level.
Yeah, and that there's nothing like playoff hockey intensity, no matter what level it's at. Just that extra gear that you go to, and I know as Sharks fans, we are starting to crave that. So, let's go to kind of some more fun stuff here. So, in your long career, what is your all-time favorite call?
Boy, that's really, really tough to pin down. I've got a few of them.
Okay.
I think maybe my favorite was a goal actually that Patrick Marleau scored against the Detroit Red Wings in overtime, assisted by Joe Thornton. I'm going to say that was 2010, an overtime game at the Sharks would win. They took control of the series there. That's one of my favorites. I think I got everything satisfactorily called out at the right time and in the right language and in the right emotion. But there are so many others, Jonas Donskoy scoring in overtime in the final. I mean, what a great moment that was. Artur Zerbe making that big save against Dallas in a game the Sharks ended up losing, but it's still the longest game in the history of the team. And, there are a few others like that didn't go so well for San Jose or went well for someone else. Brett Hull scoring his 700th goal. We have a few guys getting milestone goals. Mike Modano becoming the all-time goal scorer among American players against the Sharks. So we've had a few of those too that you don't necessarily say are good moments for the Sharks team, but we're certainly part of NHL history that we can certainly treasure. And so I've got a lot of those favorites over the years, whether they're saves or goals or individual moments that are very, very special.
So yeah, you bring up a good point there, right? Because I mean, you're still telling the story, even though you're rooting for the Sharks, right? You call for the Sharks, but you're still telling a big part of the NHL story. So when you have those big moments, like how important is it to you to be like, yes, I know he plays for the other team, but it's still, I mean, it's a community, it's a brotherhood, like calling those big moments for even if it's the other team.
Well, it is special. And of course, we have to remember that we're part of the process of selling the game to the public, too. Sharks fans need to know when Sidney Crosby comes to town that he's a great hockey player. That's going to be someone that you have to respect and maybe yell a few things at when you're in the building, but certainly respect what he does. And that's just the way it is. And I think that we have to remember this is the greatest league in the world, the greatest game in the world. And you have to make sure that you're talking about those people in a respectful way and in a way that's accurate. And that's what the Bay Area expects from its broadcasters, whether you're listening to, the Giants or the A's in baseball, whether you were listening to the Raiders or now the 49ers, of course, all these years in football, or the Warriors in basketball or the Sharks in hockey. You have to make sure in this marketplace that you're telling it like it is and telling people what's happening on the ice or on the court or on the field. And that's something that's totally respected and expected from all of us.
All right. Your favorite name to pronounce?
Well, let's see. I'd have to say probably one of the assistant coaches for the old Winnipeg Jets named Ziniatula Bilyachinov. That was a good one. He was actually a legendary Russian hockey player. That was part of their national team's history. And of course, with Igor Larionov and Sergei Makarov here, I got a chance to chat with some of these guys. But that was a long tongue twister. We have a few of them like that, though, over the course of the years.
All right. So Dan, I'm going to ask for your Hall of Fame help. So any longtime Sharks fan or Locked On Sharks fans know I struggle with especially the Russian names. The 2 days when Vladislav, see, I can't even. The 2 days when Sharks acquired Nebstevsky was the worst days of my life. Any tips?
Are you talking about Nemesnikov?
Thank you, Nemesnikov. Yeah. Yes. Any tips for a struggling announcer when it comes to with the Russian names?
Well, the one thing you have to do is don't be intimidated by a lot of letters.
Okay,
that's the thing you shouldn't be. Try to sound it out, and generally, not always, but generally, the accent, the accented part of the name is on the second to last syllable. Example: Rusanowsky.
Okay.
Example: Namestnikov.
Namestnikov. Okay.
That's actually a slightly different one. That's the middle syllable, but most of them are the second to last. And there are a couple of other little things that go with that. For instance, there's a young kid that's going to play probably with the Barracuda. Actually, this is going to be an interesting one. His name is Nikita Okhotyuk.
I struggle with his last name so much.
and the reason why is because it's a letter in the Russian language. It's actually the letter. It looks like an X to us, but it's pronounced so it's kind of like an H, but it isn't. It's a harder sound, very more guttural, almost as if you're clearing your throat. And that's the way you pronounce that. But it's in the English language. It's oftentimes spelled KH, and it's pronounced like that. So that's just one example. But this kid's somebody that'll probably see some time in the NHL. In fact, a lot of people forget he played against the Sharks last year in the uniform of the New Jersey Devils back early in the season. Then he got reassigned to the American Hockey League. I remember the game he played against the Sharks. I was kind of intrigued by him. He plays a physical style of hockey, decent positioning. And I think he's somebody that is going to be tough to play against, which is exactly the kind of hockey player that Mike Greer and Scott Fitzgerald and the rest of the Sharks staff are trying to get for the coaching staff. So I think that you'll probably see him a little bit. And of course, here's another great name for you coming up in that Timo Meier trade. That's Shahir Mukhamadullin. And again, the accent on the second to last syllable. He's an interesting character too, somebody with a big, rangy kind of a style of game, good size, but can really skate and does a lot of things very, very well. I wouldn't say that he's a Erik Karlsson type or a Brent Burns type, but he's somebody that can do all of those things quite well and is going to be a good NHL player for a long time. I think that's the progression. So there's another guy to get excited about, not only in the pronunciation department, but in the hockey department.
Yeah, I mean, he had a really nice end with the Barracuda. I think he had like 10 points in his last 9 games and stuff. But yeah, I always did the hard K. So it's the Shahir. That's with
there
the.
It is again. Shahir.
So yeah, because I was doing Shakir, so it's Shahir. Okay, so I will work on these all the rest of the summer. So
you'll be good.
All right, guys, before we finish up, Dan Rusanowsky, where we talk about some of his favorite arenas to call a game, which arenas he's, could maybe use a little bit of work or at least a little input from their broadcasters when they redesign their arenas. Do want to thank you guys for making Locked On Sharks your first listen. Again, proudly a part of the Locked On Network. We cover your team every day. If you want to be an everyday, all you got to do is just come back. We're going to have another episode later this week where we're going to be talking about what's going on with the Barracuda and why all the veterans leaving. And the Martin Kaut things. So make sure you guys are following along wherever you get podcasts, or you can watch on YouTube as well. All right. And of course, we kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but you're calling games. I mean, of course, the Sharks roster pretty well, I assume, but you're calling everybody else in the league. So how do you kind of prepare for, some of these guys coming in? Are you kind of the day before you going through the rosters? Like, how do you prepare to call a game?
Well, obviously, it's a full body of work. It's not just
Yeah.
something you do overnight. I mean, obviously, we're watching and listening to games, and we're checking with other
Mhm.
broadcasters to see how they're pronouncing the guys' names. But the most important thing you can do in terms of understanding who the players are, in terms of pronouncing their name first,
Yeah.
is to walk into the locker room and ask the player.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, you'll get people that hesitate a little bit just because they don't want to make waves, or the general manager's pronouncing his name wrong and he doesn't want to offend the general manager. I've seen that happen a zillion times. The classic example that I always have is Tom Barrasso, who's certainly a great Hall of Fame style goaltender. And my question to him when I went into the locker room was, do you pronounce it Barrasso or Barrasso?
Mhm.
And he looked at me and he said, "Kid, I don't care." So that was great. But I went with the flat A Canadian pronunciation for it,
Mhm.
because that's how he was getting to be known in the league, and that's sort of how it all shook out. But you ask the player. The other thing you do is you're obviously familiarizing yourself with the actual teams and game. You can't keep track of 780 players or however many there are
Yeah.
in the game all the time. But the one thing you can do certainly is get a beat on recent games, I try to listen almost more than I do watch, to be honest. I mean, if
Yeah.
there's a game on TV, I'll throw it on a lot of times, but many times I'm in my hotel room, I'm just in the office, and my wife wants to watch a movie, so I'll throw on the game on the radio. And again, this is the medium that I happen to be in, but it's also a really wonderful way to keep track of the league, because you get a lot of great description by all the broadcasters in the league about what's going on, and a little extra information that you don't necessarily see. And so that's fascinating to check out. But I try to also keep track of who's playing together, what line combinations are working, who's playing on the power play a little bit, although I pay more attention to the 5-on-5.
Yeah.
And then when you go to an arena in the morning, you're at the morning skate, you're looking at the player. You don't have the benefit of them having jerseys on, so you're looking at the player, and you're basically staring and trying to squint at the back of his helmet to see what
The little
number he
number.
is.
Yeah.
But then when you see him, you say his name and you say the number of the player. You say the number of
Yeah.
the player and you say his name. And that visual, and then you're looking at the player and you're saying, okay, is he a left-handed shot? What kind of a visor does he wear? Does he have any other characteristics that are special? Does he have a unique skating style? Does he have anything that, that's going to be something that you can identify? Because don't forget, we're in the broadcast booth, and usually that's not in the best position, as I'll tell you. And I've got my favorite places. My number one favorite place of all time, of course, is SAP Center of San Jose when we're downstairs.
Yeah.
But we don't get there that often during the course of the year. Usually it's once or twice during the season when there is a whole bunch of broadcasters that have to call the game. Usually that's Montreal, because you have French and English on both sides. So we only have so many booths. So that's when I come back downstairs and I'm in heaven again. But Randy and either Brett Hedican or Drew, when they're doing TV, are downstairs, but that's for a different reason, because essentially NBC basically bought the spot. So they have a spot that they paid for. And so obviously we're not paying ourselves. So there's seats in there, and that's a reasonable amount of revenue that you have for the team. So you have to understand all of those parameters. And where we are is a fine spot. I mean, there's no problem with it. We can call the game, we can see the ice for it, but we're a little farther away. Some of the other places, though, are, I characterize them this way. Dallas, I'm not a big fan of. It's a nice building, but I'm not a fan of our broadcast position there. And part of the reason is it's kind of flat. We're kind of back a little bit. That's the thing. You have a couple of places where, I don't want to say make fun of places, but in New Jersey, nice building, beautiful booth. But the way I describe it is the ice surface is in zip code 06053 and we're in 06054. We're in a different zip code up there.
Yeah.
But what saves that one for me, number one, we only go there once a year.
Yes.
But number two, it's steep. It's really steep.
So you're almost like on top. Yeah.
Well, not quite, but it's steep enough where you have better angles, so you can see. They look like ants down there, but you can see a little bit better, and it slows the game down a little bit for you.
Mm-hmm.
The worst for me, ironically, is Edmonton's new building. Their old building, I used to love to do games there, but their new building, beautiful booth again. Location is okay. but we're not in Edmonton. We're in Leduc, Alberta for the game. So the fact is that we're up, but we're also far back.
Yeah.
And far back is not my favorite because it just makes it a little bit more challenging, especially when the puck is in the opposite corner or something. And the Edmonton Oilers home uniforms aren't really that easy to read from a long distance because of the colors, at least for me. So that makes it interesting, but a lot of other
assume it's McDavid, you'll be fine.
Well, that's a good guess, either him or Draisaitl, right?
Yeah, you'll be fine.
But still, having said all that, there are a lot of other places that are very similar because the NHL has, built a lot of buildings over the last 15, 20 years. But I don't know if you can relate this, but in my mind, it's similar to, in one respect, the cookie cutter era of baseball stadiums when all of them were very similar. And a lot of them are similar. I'm thinking of places like, at least for me, places like Tampa or Buffalo or St. Louis or Philly. I mean, they're different, but they have some similar characteristics for where we are. So it's a little bit easier to prepare, and some are better than others. And again, I'd say my favorite places on the road to broadcast games would probably be Montreal and Detroit. Both of them are very similar buildings. They're really a great setup, great arena, great atmosphere, amazing hockey tradition. And also the fact that they've thought of the broadcaster before building the facility, instead of building the facility, going back to the broadcaster and saying, "Hey, how do you like this?" and then getting the feedback and say, "Well, sorry, we're not changing it anyway." Madison Square Garden used to be one of the worst, but now it's one of the best because they've renovated that building. In fact, they spent quite a bit of money, almost $1 billion, I think, on redoing that building. So the recent controversy over their occupancy permit is kind of an interesting story. I think everything will smooth out there, at least until it's time to renovate it again, and then they might get some talk. But it's in an ideal spot at Penn Station, and that's, of course, the source of some of that controversy. But that's a really good spot since they redid it. But back in the old days, it was, again, flat. The garden's angle of the stands are rather flat for hockey, and then we were all the way back, and up. So that was a little bit more difficult. But now they built a gondola where we got a much better angle. We're closer to the ice, actually. And it really is a great experience. The only thing there is that the elevator is a little bit slow to get down to the bus after the game, but that's okay. Funny thing, Islanders, and I don't know why we're on this topic, but the Islander building, the new building in Elmont, nice building again, but visiting radio booth is on the goal line, so we don't have the best angle, and you can't really see the scoreboard either because of the way that the superstructure's in your way. You can see the ice, but unfortunately you can't do that. So they've got these video screens where you can see the scoreboard in front of you, so they've taken care of some of that. Whereas Seattle, on the other hand, the other new building in the last couple of years, I think they've done a really good job with the setup for what we do. So every place is different and everyone has their little quirks, including SAP Center, but that's part of what makes it fun, right? To go to a place and to understand how that all works and to make it work for the audience.
All right. My last question before I get you out of here. Pre-game rituals or what do you do to, like, kind of the day of, I know you morning skate. I know a lot of hockey players, big nap guys. Are you a nap guy? How's it? Nope.
I can't nap because I've got to do the Teal report by 3:00 usually. Drew and I do the Sharks morning skate show, which we actually record at about 10, and then it goes on about an hour later. That gives us a little time to make it to edit it out and make it the right length of program and so forth. Every once in a while we'll do it live too, but. So I'm pretty busy on the day of the game, but I'd say a couple of the strange things that I like to do. Number one, I like to make sure that I used to like to make sure I ate lunch, but I almost don't have time for that. You definitely can't broadcast the game on an empty stomach. So I got to make sure I have a decent dinner at about 5:00 when we get to the rink. But a couple of odd little things that I do, I suppose, when I'm preparing for a game and I'm filling out my score sheet, I always, you're writing down the names of the two teams. So let's say San Jose and Los Angeles. I always write San Jose's name first.
No matter if home or away.
Home or away. I always fill in that part of my score sheet first, and then I put in the LA stuff later. Why? I don't know. I usually have a couple of different pairs of glasses that I wear. My wife said, "Hey, how do you decide when to change them?" Well, as it turned out, for a while there, I would wear a pair of glasses until they lost, and then I would change. Sometimes I change it up though.
Yeah.
But it's little things like that you do, and it's really, what it is. It's not superstition really. What it is you're trying to, and players do this when something goes well, you try to repeat it.
Yep.
And when you get into a routine where things are going well, you feel really good. I mean, the one thing that I can tell you is if I feel good about the way our pregame show goes, that 30-minute Sharks warm-up pregame show, if I feel that that's tight and I feel that that's organized and I feel that that we've prepared well for it, generally the rest of the show goes really well. And if it doesn't go as well, then I might not be as satisfied with the actual game either. But it just just sort of getting into that habit of doing something the right way, making sure that you're prepared for it. So I'd say that I focus on preparation, getting a good meal in before the game, and making sure that that we're all buttoned down. And I think that those are the things that I try to do. And writing the Sharks name first.
Yes. Have you thought about, a lot of the players that play the Super Bowl, about you, Randy, Brett, maybe you guys incorporating some Super Bowl into your pregame warmups?
Incorporating what?
Super Bowl, they play the soccer game with,
nah.
you don't want you, Brett, Randy, all doing that? Get ready, get loose.
Nah, we're not going to be doing any Super Bowl. That's for sure. I'd have to say that probably Hedeken would be the champion of that. He's Brett's a really good athlete and somebody that's fun to have around, as is Drew. But Randy and I enjoy working with those guys. And whenever Scott Hannon or Mark Smith or whoever is able to jump in with us does so, it's always a pleasure to have those guys on with us.
Dan, you've said it all. If the people don't know where to find you right now, where can the people find you?
Well, it depends on where you want to find me. If you want to find the Sharks audio network, the easy thing to do is to go to sjsharks.com/listen, or make sure you pick up the Sharks app. And on the app in the upper right-hand corner, when you open it up, there's a little live button. You can hit that. We're on 24 hours a day. We have terrestrial radio affiliates that carry games in Northern California. We still actually do that.
Yes.
From Fresno to Eureka. There are stations that pick up games, and we appreciate the work that they do. On Twitter, it's easy to follow me at Dan Rusanowsky, as long as you can spell my name. And we're on Facebook, and I do have an Instagram page, but I limit what I do there just a little bit. We put up some things that we do during the course of the hockey season, but I'm probably less active there than I am on Twitter or somewhere else. But those are the easiest places to find me, and you never know, you'll find me in a rink somewhere in North America getting ready to do a game, and that's where I love to be.
All right. Appreciate your time, Dan.
Anytime.
I had one of the highlights of my career talking to Dan Rusanowsky, legendary Hall of Famer. I told you guys going to have a Hall of Fame caliber guest, and I literally delivered you guys a Hall of Fame caliber guest and Dan Rusanowsky. Absolute pleasure to talk to. I could sit there and listen to Rusanowsky talk for hours because he's just amazing at what he does, and we are very, very lucky to have him calling games for us here in San Jose. Rusanowsky's the best. So thank you guys for checking out myself and Dan. If you're new to the show, make sure you guys are following along wherever you get podcasts. And of course, you can watch on YouTube as well. You can follow the show on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and Threads at Locked On Sharks. You can follow me on Twitter and Threads at MyFryhole. And until tomorrow, bye, friends.